Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. And I no longer make videos weekly, but every once in a while I'm still going to come out with a video. So today we're going to be talking about the book of Revelation. And so we're talking about the Revelation, and I'll get into it and read from the book. And it's actually the revelation of Christ, and the book of Revelation is by John the Evangelist. And as I'm reading it, you'll see that this is Christ giving the revelation to John. And what I'm going to explain is how Jewish Zionism and modern church dogma is not supported by the New Testament. We'll get into that as well. And to keep it in context, there's two main points that I'm going to be making during this video. The first point is that Revelation is describing the spiritual world, not the physical world that we live in. So John the Evangelist had spiritual vision, which is known as clairvoyance, and he was able to see these things that Christ was revealing to him in Revelation. The second point that I want to make is that a lot of people think that the book of Revelation is predicting the future, or telling what's going to happen in the future. And that's just not true. I'll read the book of Revelation. I'm also going to read a little bit from the Gospel of Matthew as well. And it contradicts that idea. Revelation talks about the past, the present time, which is around the time of the crucifixion, and then things that'll happen soon, the near future, not the distant future. A lot of people think that Revelations is talking about things that are happening today, and that it's predicting, the distant future, 2,000 years later. That's not true. And yeah, these are the references that I'm going to give. We'll get into Revelation, a little bit of Matthew, and then at the end, I'm going to talk briefly about Yaldabaoth and Jehovah. In my last video, there was some confusion regarding Yaldabaoth, and Yaldabaoth is in what's known as the Gnostic scriptures, and the Gnostic scriptures come from the Nag Hammadi texts or scrolls. And for example, the Book of Mary, the Book of Thomas, the Book of Philip, the Secret Book of John, those are all Gnostic scriptures. And in those Gnostic scriptures, it talks a lot about this, especially in the Secret Book of John. If you're not familiar with that, you can check out my other series. I'll leave a link in the description. But the Gnostic scriptures gets into Yaldabaoth, who's really a negative god, and the Gnostic teachings really equate Yaldabaoth with Jehovah, and it says, they say that Yaldabaoth and Jehovah are the same. But that's a great mystery that I'm going to talk about, and you have to be careful not to necessarily say that they're both the same. I'll explain that. There are some differences. Certainly, if they're the same, then a major transformation has taken place, and that's why Rudolf Steiner doesn't talk about Yaldabaoth. Rudolf Steiner talks about Jehovah, and then Rudolf Steiner talks about Satan, but he refers to Satan as Ahriman. So Rudolf Steiner is the foremost teacher in the Rosicrucian Teachings. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Rosicrucian Teachings as well, from the work of Rudolf Steiner. and we'll give a little bit of perspective from the Rosicrucian Teachings. So, to start off with, if you read Revelation, and everything that I just said now, I'm going to support it with the New Testament. And there's another book that I'm going to talk about briefly as well from Rudolf Steiner, and it's called The East in the Light of the West. Really good book. And I've been learning more about Jehovah and the moon. We'll talk about that briefly towards the end, though. But the first thing I want to mention is as soon as you open up Revelation and you start reading it, the very first chapter, the very first verse says, and it reads as follows. It says, "The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show his servants things which must soon come to pass." That's the very first verse in the first chapter of Revelation. And again, it's saying that it's talking about things that must soon come to pass. And of course, the book of Revelation is very short. It's not even as long as the Gospels. Each of the Gospels is around 100 pages or so, or even less. And Revelations, I think, is even less than half of that. So you could read Revelations in a couple of hours if you're a pretty good reader, maybe even sooner than that. I like to take my time when I'm reading, so it took me a couple of hours, but people that read very fast could probably get through it in an hour or so, an hour and a half. And we're going to get into some other stuff as well as we go through this. I'm going to talk about the 7 stars and how it refers to these 7 planets. It also, Revelation talks about 7 archangels. I've got them listed there. I'll explain that a little bit. And then Revelation keeps talking about tens and sevens, the number 10 and the number 7. 10 horns, 10 kings, 10 kingdoms. It talks about 7 candlesticks and all these other things. And so we've got a lot of 7s here and a couple of rows of 10s. We're going to talk about that as well. But the one thing I want to say to keep this in perspective and to give it some context, it's always good to keep things in context, is Revelation really is just, it's explaining things that happened around the time of the crucifixion, including during the crucifixion. So before I even continue with Revelations, I'm going to preface, I'm just going to briefly preface with the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. I'm going to read chapter 24, verses 1 through 35, and then 27 verses 45 through 53. Shouldn't take long. I'll read it directly from the Bible. And chapter 24, 1 through 35, this is very important to so that you can have context and keep this all in perspective. This relates to Revelation. And it says, "And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, 'See ye not all these things? Verily I say to you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down.' And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? And Jesus answered and said to them, Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure until the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whosoever readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they shall say unto you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers. Believe it not. For as the lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Now, this is very important to remember and to keep in mind. Some of this stuff actually happens during the crucifixion, and it's also talked about during Revelation. For example, here in verse 29, I just read, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender, and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh, or near. So likewise, you, when you shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Again, very key to remember some of these verses that I just read, especially verse 34, where it says, Verily I say unto you, this is Jesus talking, of course. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Who's he talking to? He's talking to his closest students, the disciples. And he's explaining this to them. He's telling them that all these things, that this generation will not pass until all these things are fulfilled. He's basically telling them that it's going to happen during their lifetime. So, and the reason why I mention that and I emphasize that is because a lot of the churches, they don't teach the Bible. They teach what's known as false church dogma. And they're still waiting for this stuff to happen. They didn't read the Gospels. They must not have read the Gospels because Jesus says that it's already happened. So now I'm going to read. It's not going to take us long. It's going to be a lot quicker. But I'm going to read from chapter 27 of Matthew, the same book, verses 45 through 53. This is only going to take a few seconds because it's not much to read. But 27, 45 through 53. And this is the crucifixion. It talks about the crucifixion. Verse 45 reads as follows, and I'll go through all the way through until 53. Now, from the 6th hour, there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And that's verse 45 in chapter 27 of the book of Matthew. So for hours it got dark. For hours, right? That's not an eclipse. An eclipse is for a few minutes. All right? So this is a very powerful event here where the sun went dark for hours. And Jesus was just talking about that as I was reading it from chapter 24 a minute ago. He was explaining that would be one of the things that happens. So it's referring to things that are happening around the time of the crucifixion. This is the crucifixion I'm reading about now. And I'll just read that again and I'll continue. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice. This is Jesus being crucified. Cried with a loud voice saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Some of them that stood there, when they heard that, said, This man calls for Elijah. And straightway one of them ran and took a sponge and filled it with vinegar and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. The rest said, Let be. Let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. Not a very nice thing to do. If he's dying of thirst, vinegar couldn't have tasted very good. And they're basically tempting him. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. They didn't believe, I don't think. if they could have took him down themselves and maybe tried to help him. But anyway, I'm going to continue until 53. So we'll continue with 49, verse 49, which reads as follows. This is after they gave Jesus the vinegar. 49. The rest said, let it be. Let us see whether Elijah come to save him. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain, or in two, from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. Now the holy city's in heaven, actually. But this is a very key thing that I read to you here. It says, verse 51, and behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain, or in two, from the top to the bottom. The earth quaked and the rocks split. That's how that reads in modern terminology. What that's saying is that heaven opened up. Heaven opened up. And you can read some of this stuff in the other Gospels as well. And it talks a little bit more. One of them talks about the angels coming up and down, because once heaven opened up, I mean, that's a very powerful event. Angels were coming up and down and stuff like that. So that was from the book of Matthew. Now we're going to get back into Revelation. And in the book of Revelation, we'll go to verse 7 in chapter 1, where it says, behold, he comes with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him during the crucifixion. So Revelations is talking about the crucifixion. It's talking about the crucifixion is kind of the time, that's the current present time in Revelations. But Revelations also talks about the past, things that happened before that, and it also talks about things that will happen soon, not long after the crucifixion. And again, verse 7 says, behold, he comes with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him during the crucifixion. Because that's when Jesus was pierced, right? During the crucifixion. They wanted to make sure he was dead, so they stuck a spear in his side, I believe. That's in the Gospels as well. And now people talk about a trumpet, and they talk about stuff like that. We'll get into that a little bit, but verse 11 talks about seven churches in Asia, and it talks about I believe Philadelphia. I'm not sure what I was going to mention about that, so we'll move on. Verses 14 through 16 in chapter 1 of the book of Revelation doesn't describe a man. If you read verses 14 through 16, it's describing Jesus in a new, incorruptible spiritual body, not a dense material body like this, but a spiritual body. And it says his eyes and feet were fire, and his countenance was like the sun. That's a spiritual body. That's not like a dense physical body like you and I have, which means that normally a person could only see him if they were clairvoyant, unless he revealed himself to everybody. like during the crucifixion. But this is why Mary, in the Gospels, Mary doesn't recognize Jesus when he returns, the second coming. She supposes that he's the gardener. Of course, the first coming was when Christ entered Jesus during the baptism. There's a lot of false stuff that people talk about. It's false dogma. Revelation doesn't talk about Israel at all until the very end. It mentions Israel, but it's talking about Israel in heaven. These 12 thrones in heaven. And when it talks about Jerusalem, it's not talking about Jerusalem on earth. It's talking about the New Jerusalem. I'll explain that. The New Jerusalem is a spiritual place. It's in heaven. It's not on earth. So a lot of people are trying to say right now that Israel has to take over the world and all this nonsense. These nonsense demonic wars have to occur in order for Jesus to return, but that's not true. Jesus already returned. It's in the Gospels and it's in the Bible. I'm explaining it now, but they don't believe it. What people know at the churches, they know dogma, false church dogma. Even when you go to seminary school, what you learn is you learn dogma, false church dogma. And think about it. Why would Jews be saying that Israel has to take over the world today in order for Christ to return when they didn't accept Christ the first time he was here, right? In the Gospels, Jesus and the Jewish religious authorities are constantly fighting, and it's the Jewish religious authorities who demand that the state authorities crucify him. And Pontius Pilate was a state authority. So why now would the Jews be saying that they have to take over the world in order for the second coming? They're manipulating Christians. They never believed in Christ in the first place, and now suddenly they're talking about Jesus coming again. You got to see through the lies. So right now we'll get into chapter 2, verse 9 in the book of Revelation. And it says this. It says, this is Christ speaking. Christ says, I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Why would Christ say that? It's ironic that Christ says that in the book of Revelation, tells that to John the Evangelist, right? In chapter 2, verse 9. And then today you have Zionists trying to say that they have to, these nonsense demonic wars need to take place and they need to take over the world in order for the second coming of Christ to occur. Doesn't make sense. It's false dogma. It's manipulative. They're trying to manipulate Christians because the Christians are most of them already follow the Antichrist. They don't follow the true Christ. So they're ripe for being deceived, and it's sad. That's the purpose of this video, is to spread the truth and to really get in deep into the scripture and really break it down and explain it. And so I find it ironic that today they're trying to use the book of Revelation to support these wars. And let's just take Palestine, Gaza as an example. They leveled, Israel leveled Gaza, and Gaza was nothing but unarmed civilians. That's all it was. It was all unarmed civilians. And they leveled it in the name of God, and that God that they're serving is Satan. So I'm going to read it one more time. The book of Revelation, chapter 2, verse 9, it says, I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Powerful words from Christ. Powerful words. Ironic that's when you actually read Revelations, take the time, we're talking about 50 pages or so, an hour or two of reading. And people, they listen to all this stuff, and many of them believe it, and they get, they fall for the false dogma, and they're careless. And a lot of them call themselves Christians, and they're so careless that they don't even bother to read a 50-page book. But if they did, they'd see what Christ says. Christ actually addresses some of this stuff. We'll go to chapter 3, verse 4, where it says, and they shall walk with me in white, for they are worthy. And when it says walk in white, what that means is it's talking about walking in the Spirit. White refers to the light that surrounds a person who is following Christ in the Spirit. If you could see them through clairvoyant vision, you would see that they have a tremendous light that surrounds them. So to walk in white, whenever the Bible or any scriptures talk about walking in white, it's talking about walking in the Spirit. So again, chapter 3, verse 4, it says, and they shall walk with me in white, for they are worthy. That doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you consider what I just said. It's talking about walking with Christ in the Spirit. That makes a lot more sense. So, and some of these things I'm getting into the Rosicrucian Teachings and the work of Rudolf Steiner. He really explains a lot of this stuff really, really good. Now, also, Revelations talks about God's city and New Jerusalem. So God's city and New Jerusalem, as I was mentioning a few minutes ago, not on earth. This is a spiritual place in heaven, and Revelations explains that. I'm gonna get into that. And chapter 3, verse 12 reads as follows: He that overcomes, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more. And I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, which is New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God. And I will write upon him my new name. So, again, you always want to keep perspective and keep this all in context. So this is Christ giving the revelation to John the evangelist, who's a clairvoyant. And not only was John a clairvoyant and could see into the spiritual world, but we know from the Gnostic scriptures that I was mentioning a few minutes ago, the Nag Hammadi scriptures, that, for example, the secret book of John, we know that John and another apostle actually went up to heaven with Christ, but then they came back down and they established the churches. Very, very similar to Elijah in the Old Testament, who also went up to heaven. So I'm going to read now from chapter 3, verse 13, and it reads as follows: He that has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So again, this is getting into spiritual beings. The Christ is a spiritual being in a new, Jesus is in a new incorruptible spiritual body. Physical bodies, dense physical, material bodies, flesh and blood like we have, they're not incorruptible. When's the last time you saw someone who was, made of flesh and bone, never not die, right? They say that there's two things you can guarantee: that you'll, die and you'll have to pay taxes. That, if anytime we're talking about an incorruptible body, we're talking about a spiritual body. And the lowest would be like an ether body. And then the next highest would be like an astral body. So this is the Christ Spirit talking. As I was just getting into chapter 3, verse 13, he that has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And this is Christ, the Christ Spirit talking. Jesus is in his new incorruptible body, as I was just explaining. The new city of God, the city of God is the New Jerusalem, which is a spiritual city, not a physical city on earth. It's not like Washington D.C. or L.A., California, when they talk about the city of God and New Jerusalem. A lot of people believe false dogma, and they think that the city of God or New Jerusalem is talking about Israel as it exists today in the year 2026, which doesn't make any sense at all. First of all, the country Israel as it exists today in the year 2026 isn't even related in any way, shape, or form to the Israel in the Bible. You can't even make that argument. But I'm going to go just pretend for a minute that that it's the same Israel. Just for the heck of it, let's just pretend that it is the same Israel. That's not a good thing. That's not a good thing for Israel, because in the Old Testament, Israel did nothing but disobey God left and right. They just wouldn't obey God. If you read the Old Testament, they just would not obey God. And God punished them left and right. It's all throughout the Old Testament is nothing but Israel disobeying God, dishonoring God, and doing wicked and evil things, and God punishing them. It happens again and again and again. And examples of that would be when, to punish them, God had them become basically like slaves in Egypt. And then Moses leads them out. They start disobeying God again. And so then God punishes them by letting them become slaves in Babylon. And the Babylonians destroying the first temple of Solomon, right? That was all from punishment. Then, when you read the New Testament, in the New Testament, they hated Jesus Christ. They wouldn't accept Jesus. And if you read the parable of the winepress, which I got into in a previous series, I'll leave a link in the description. But I went over all the four Gospels. I did a really in-depth series. And in the parable of the winepress, Jesus speaks that parable against Israel and against the Jewish religious authorities. And Jesus basically says that, you killed all the prophets. So finally, the Father sends the Son, and you want to kill the Son. So what's going to happen is the land that was promised to you from God is going to be taken from you and given to a people who honors God. That's right in the Gospels. That's right in the New Testament. So even if Israel as it exists today, even if you want to try to say that's the Israel of the Bible, which it's not, it wouldn't be a good thing for Israel, because basically Jesus in the Gospels condemns Israel, the earthly Israel. Of course, Jesus and the 12 apostles represent a new Israel, a heavenly Israel. Each of the 12 apostles actually represents two things. Each of the 12 apostles represents the 12 tribes, as well as the 12 signs of the zodiac. Now, but they're going to rule in heaven, a heavenly kingdom. So there's a difference here. I just wanted to explain that a little bit. I went over that before in previous videos, but it's really good to explain that. This is already starting to get a little lengthy, so I'm going to try to kick it into a little bit of a faster gear here so we don't get bogged down too much. Now, we're going to get into the Revelation chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. I'm going to read that directly from the Bible. And hopefully I can find it quickly. And I'm not even in Revelation. I'm in Matthew still. So we'll go to Revelation. And it's chapter 4, just 4 verses, 1 through 4. After this I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was, as it were, of a trumpet talking with me, which said, Come up hither, come up here, and I will show you things which must be hereafter, or things to come. And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne, and he that sat was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone, and there was a rainbow round about the throne, in sight like an emerald. And around the throne were 24 seats, and upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment, and they had on their heads crowns of gold. Again, this supports everything I've been saying, everything I've been explaining. Behold, a door was opened in heaven. In heaven. It's talking about heaven. It's not talking about earth. It's talking about heaven. That's my point. So, now it said the 24 elders wore white raiment, which is a reference to a spiritual body of light, like I was explaining before, not a dense, flesh and bone physical body. Now I'm going to read. Excuse me, I just drank a bunch of coconut water. I feel like I'm burning up. But we're going to read verses 5 through 8. And out of the throne proceeded lightnings and thunderings and voices. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was a sea of glass, like crystal. And in the midst of the throne, around the throne, were 4 beasts full of eyes, before and behind. And the first beast was like a lion, and the second beast like a calf, and the third beast had a face of a man, and the fourth beast was like a flying eagle. And the 4 beasts had 6 wings on them, And they were full of eyes, and they rest not day and night, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which is and is to come, which was and is to come. Now, I know exactly what that's talking about from the work of Rudolf Steiner, from the Rosicrucian Teachings. And I'm going to explain it to you right now. So, the four beasts are clearly, if you study the work of Rudolf Steiner, it's clearly referring to cherubim. Rudolf Steiner taught that the cherubim have three animal heads and a human face. The animal heads are bull, lion, and eagle. I think in Revelation it said calf, lion, and eagle, right? But calf is a baby bull, right? Or a cow. Same animal. Bull is a male cow. Steiner also said the cherubim have at least 4 wings, and this one, the Revelation said 6 wings, but they could have up to 6 wings. They have at least 4 wings with eyes all over them, and Revelation said they had eyes all over them. So clearly, it's describing cherubim. Now, the cherubim are they're not planetary beings. I'm going to get into that a little bit maybe if we have time. But so there are planetary beings that are within our solar system, and then there are in the Rosicrucian Teachings, Rudolf Steiner teaches that there are also zodiacal beings in the hierarchy that are from they're further out in space where the constellations are. Far outside of our solar system. So this city of God is not in our planetary system. And the God referred to here is not Jehovah, because Jehovah is a moon god. Jehovah is in the moon or on the moon. I think they can actually go inside of it. They're not necessarily on it the way we're on Earth, but they say there's a hollow Earth and there's beings inside the Earth as well. No need to get into that right now. But so I just want to make it clear, though, that we're talking about a city of God in the constellations outside of our planetary system. So the God referred to here is higher than Jehovah. The God referred to here is known as the One, or the God of all, that is talked about in the Gnostic scriptures. For example, if you read the secret book of John, which is in the Nag Hammadi scriptures. But before we get into chapter 5 and we talk about the 7 seals, you'll know that Revelation refers to 7 angels, and or 7 spirits. And we mentioned that a few minutes ago. We mentioned 7 spirits, the 7 spirits of God or of Jehovah. And now that could refer to 2 things. Jehovah, of course, is an Elohim, and it could refer to the 7 Elohim. It could also refer to the 7 when it says, and also in other places of Revelation, it talks about 7 angels. When it talks about 7 angels, it's clearly talking about 7 archangels. And the 7 archangels are listed here, and they are associated with 7 planetary bodies in our solar system: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Now, Revelation talks about 7 stars, and it's referring to the 7 planets in our solar system, to the best of my knowledge. That's the way it makes sense. When you look at all the information, it adds up like that. So In chapter 5, there's a book with 7 seals that no one in heaven or earth was worthy to open. But the Lamb is worthy to open the book. And the slain, they call it the slain Lamb, the Lamb that was slain. And that refers to Christ Jesus, who is now in this incorruptible spiritual body that I've been talking about, heavenly body. So in chapter 6, the 7 seals are opened. The first seal reveals a white horse ridden by a conqueror, someone who conquers. The second seal reveals a red horse ridden by a war maker or a warmonger. Think of like Trump or Netanyahu. The third seal reveals, of course, this is in the Roman times, so not referring to today. The third seal reveals a black horse ridden by a judge, somebody with scales like a judge. The fourth seal reveals a pale horse ridden by death. The fifth seal reveals those who were killed for spreading the word of God. The sixth seal describes what happened basically in the Gospels during the crucifixion, if you read it. And I will read it now. I'm going to read chapter 6. I'll read verses 12 through 17, which explain the sixth seal. And I say that that's describing what happened in the Gospels during the crucifixion. So that's going to be chapter 6, 12 through 17. Got this little tiny marker. I don't know where my big marker went. I think it's over on the desk. I'll get it after the next pause. So we're going to go read 6, 12 through 17. And it reads as follows. And I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. And the stars of heaven fell into the earth, even as a fig tree casts its untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? But it talks about the crucifixion, because it says here, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black. And I was explaining that, how in the Gospel of Matthew, we went over that before, right? How during the crucifixion, the sun does go black, and there is an earthquake. There's an earthquake that's so powerful that it says that heaven opened up and the earth split open. And in the other Gospels, it talks about angels coming up and down as well. I'm running out of time here. This is already getting really, really long, so I'm not going to go over every single little thing. But I grabbed my bigger marker now, so it should be a little easier for me. So now we'll talk about the seventh seal. So after the seventh seal is opened, there's a half hour of silence, followed by the 7 angels with 7 trumpets. and that's in chapter 8. Chapter 12 of Revelation describes the war in heaven, and I'm going to read from that briefly. Chapter 12. We'll read about the war in heaven. This is pretty interesting. Everybody talks about this war in heaven, and they're actually referring to Revelation. I'm going to read 7 through 9 and also verse 17. So 7 through 9 reads as follows. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth. It says into the earth, like inside the earth. And his angels were cast out with him. So again, this is talking about heaven. It's not talking about earth. People try to say that Revelation is predicting future events that are going to happen on earth. No, you got to read it. We're talking about a 50-page book and people don't even bother to read it. It's amazing. It's truly amazing. We're talking about things that are happening in the spirit world, in the spiritual world, and in heaven. Now, things we know from the Rosicrucian Teachings from Rudolf Steiner that everything in the physical world on earth has a spiritual thing. There's something spiritual behind it. So sometimes you can connect what's happening in the spiritual world to things that are happening on earth, but it's not easy to do. Revelation is clearly talking about things in the spiritual world, though. The question is how do you connect it to earthly events? We're going to get into that a little bit. Let me read verse 17 briefly. And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So this Satan, the dragon, was very angry and wanted to attack, inflict the people of God who serve God. And you can do some research and you can look. I really get into history a lot. When Jesus is talking about, I read it earlier in Matthew, right? And you can read it in the Gospels where Jesus is talking about the temple being encircled by an army and then destroyed. Jerusalem is encircled by an army, and then the second temple of Solomon is destroyed, right? And Jesus says that, and people are still waiting for this to happen. But of course, AD, when we talk about time, we talk about AD, and people think that means after death. But Jesus actually died in the year 33 AD. So AD actually refers to the birth of Jesus, not the death of Jesus, technically. Because according to our calendar, Jesus died in the year 33 AD. Now, in the year 70 AD, which was only 37 years later, Jesus said all these things are going to happen before this generation passes away. Only 37 years later, after the crucifixion, the Roman army surrounded Jerusalem and destroyed the second temple of Solomon, just like Jesus said. He said all these things are going to happen before this generation passes away. And people today who follow the dogma and they don't read or learn anything or know anything, they're still waiting for this stuff to happen. But Jerusalem was encircled and attacked, and the second temple of Solomon was destroyed by the Roman Titus Flavius. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about this. If you study and you can look at history and stuff like that, there's 7 famous hills of Rome. They're also, Revelation refers to them as 7 mountains. There's also 7 famous kings of Rome. Okay? Here's the hills listed right here. Here's the 7 famous kings listed right here, beginning with the first one, Romulus, right? So, but if you read Revelation chapter 13, verse 1, it says, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy." And so that's what I'm getting into now. We're getting into the 10s and the 7s. 7 kings of Rome. You could research this on your own if you don't believe me. I'm not making this stuff up. This is very famous. The 7 kings of Rome, the 7 hills or mountains of Rome. Here's the 10. Revelation keeps talking about 10 kings or 10 horns and all that. Well, there was 10 emperors, 10 famous emperors of Rome. That's very well known if you study history. And beginning with Augustus all the way down to Constantine, there's 10 of them. Okay, so I'm going to read from chapter 13, verses 11 through 12. In the book of Revelation. "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. And he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and caused the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed." So who's it talking about when it talks about this second beast? That's the question, right? Now, if you study history, after the Roman Empire, there came 2 more empires: the Byzantine Empire and the Holy Roman Empire. So the Holy Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire, they were continuations of the original Roman Empire. So that could be one um, explanation of this second beast. You could also think of the Roman Catholic Church is a continuation of the Roman Empire as well, and that would explain what this second beast is referring to. Now, if you study Rome and the Roman Empire, it was not a good empire. They did not do good things. They would crush. Their army would crush a people, go into a foreign area, a foreign land or country, defeat the people by killing their army or crushing them with the sword, and then they would take over their religion and rule them through their religion, which is very bad. They did a lot of bad stuff, the Roman Empire. So it makes sense that Revelation would refer to them as a beast. They were a beast. The Roman Empire was a beast. I'm going to read chapter 15 now. "And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God. And I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God. And they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, Great and marvelous are thy works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are thy ways, thou King of saints. Who shall not fear thee, O Lord, and glorify thy name? For thou only art holy, for all nations shall come and worship before you, for your judgments are made manifest. And after I looked, and behold, the temple and the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened, and the 7 angels came out of the temple, having the 7 plagues, clothed in pure and white linen, and having their breasts girded with golden girdles. And one of the 4 beasts gave unto the 7 angels 7 golden vials full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power. And no man was able to enter into the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. And it's talking about the 7 angels, and I got them right here on the board. When it talks about 7 angels, it's talking about the 7 archangels that are linked to 7 bodies in our solar system. Gabriel is stationed down at the moon. Raphael is stationed at Mercury. Anael is assigned to Venus. Michael is assigned to the moon. Samael, Mars. Zachariel, Jupiter, and Oriphiel, Saturn. And each of these 7 planetary bodies, the book of Revelation refers to them as 7 stars. Of course, they're planets, except the moon. We call the moon. But each of these 7 planets are bodies in our solar system, has its own group of beings that dwell there. For example, the Elohim dwell at the sun. The Elohim are also known as the powers, and they're also known as the exousiai. Now I'm going to read chapter 17. And there came one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great whore that sits upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. And the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. And he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness, and her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of whores and abominations of the earth. So it just mentioned 3 colors. Now scarlet, of course, is red, and red was the main color of the Roman Empire. But what I just read, it also mentioned purple and gold, which were the other 2 main colors that were used by the Roman Empire. I'm going to read verse 9 from chapter 17. And here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. So here it is right here. If you study history, Roman history, there's a famous 7 hills, the 7 hills of Rome. And in Revelation, it refers to the 7 hills as 7 mountains. Here they are listed right here. These are the 7 kings listed, very famous 7 kings. And for example, Romulus was the first one, and it goes all the way down the list. What else did we talk about? So the seven mountains. And next I'm going to check out, I'm going to read chapter 18, verses 1 and 2, and also verse 18. So chapter 18, 1 and 2. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lit with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. So we're talking about Babylon now. And in chapter 18, verse 18, it's talking about Babylon, and it says, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning. It's talking about Babylon burning. And cried when they saw the smoke of Babylon burning, saying, what city is like this great city? And so it's talking about Babylon. It says Babylon right in the Bible, right? And if you study history, in the year 689 BCE, Babylon fell, and it was brutal. The Assyrian king Sennacherib completely destroyed Babylon, and it was burned and reduced to rubble and then flooded. So I don't know why people today try to associate or attribute Babylon in Revelation to some country today, when the Bible clearly says Babylon, and all you have to do is study history, and it adds up with what the Scripture says. So it doesn't make any sense to try to say, oh, well, Babylon is talking about this country today or that country that's on earth today. No, Babylon is talking about Babylon, and Babylon, just like Revelations describe, the smoke of her burning, saying, what city, what a great city. That's what actually happened. And Babylon was not a good place. It was a bad place. That's why God punished Babylon. I'm going to read chapter 19, verses 11 through 14. As before we wrap this up, we've just got a few minutes left. And I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon it was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he does judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head was many crowns. And he had a name written that no man knew but he himself. And he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. So again, this is, it's talking about heaven and the spiritual world and the Word of God. And then we have to try to figure out what manifests as the Word of God on earth. Well, that's the Bible, right? The Bible is the Word of God. So I'm going to read chapter 20, 1 through 3. Verses 1 through 3 read as follows. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that he must be let loose for a short time. And don't let that boggle your mind. Keep it in context and in perspective, like I've been saying. Remember that Revelation is not predicting the future on earth. It's describing the past, the present, which the present in this case is the time of the crucifixion, and things that will happen very soon after the crucifixion, as the Bible itself has already explained. I just read it all and explained it directly from the scripture. I'm going to read chapter 21, and then we'll talk about Yaldabaoth and Jehovah briefly before I finish in this video. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. So just imagine, Christ is giving this revelation to John, and John he can see into the spiritual world, but he was also taken up into heaven, where he could actually see firsthand the things that heaven and the spiritual world, and things that Christ was explaining to him. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God." So what's it talking about? It's talking about heaven. It keeps using the word heaven, and behold, and I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, "Behold," right? So it's talking about heaven, and when we go to heaven and we're with God, God will dwell with us, and we will be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. It's talking about heaven, though. It's not talking about earth. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. It's talking about heaven, right? Because there's death on earth. It's not talking about earth. We know that there's death on earth. It says here there will be no more death. Again, you keep it in context and in perspective, and it makes a lot more sense, and you're not deceived. You're not deceived by the dogma. And he that sat upon the throne said, "Behold, I make all things new." And he said to me, "Write, for these words are true and faithful." And he said to me, "It is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give to him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. He that overcomes shall inherit all things. I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the fearful, and unbelieving, and the abominable, and murderers, and whoremongers, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. And there came to me one of the seven angels which had the seven vials full of the seven last plagues, and talked with me, saying, "Come here, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife." And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. Again, it's talking about in the Spirit and his spiritual body. And he carried me away in the Spirit. And it mentions heaven again. So it's talking about heaven, the spiritual world. Jerusalem descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, and her light was like a stone most precious, and even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. and had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. This is the first time that it even mentions Israel in the whole Revelation at the very end in the last chapter. I think this is the last chapter, right? No, it's second to the last chapter. We're in chapter 21. But again, it's talking about Israel in heaven, the heavenly Israel, not earth. Remember the parable of the winepress. On the east, 3 gates. On the north, 3 gates. On the south, 3 gates. And on the west, 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So, I explained that earlier, how it's talking about heavenly Israel and heavenly Jerusalem in the spirit world, not on earth. I'm going to stop. I was going to read the whole chapter 21, but I'm running out of battery. Before I run out of battery, hopefully it didn't run out yet in my camera. So I wanted to, for the last couple minutes, I wanted to talk briefly about Yaldabaoth and Jehovah. All right, I'm starting to run out of light here. Let's see if that helps a little. Oh, that's going to cast a light on the whiteboard. I don't have my other lights set up right now, the ones that I normally use, because I haven't been making videos lately. But we'll talk about Yaldabaoth and Jehovah briefly. Of course, Jehovah is the leader of the Elohim. Elohim, these are some of the other terms for Elohim. Allah, Allaha. It's actually Allah in Arabic. That's what Allah in Arabic means. It's talking about the Elohim. Of course, the God of Judaism is the same God as the God of Islam, and they tried to deny that. They try to say that the Jews say that no, it's not the same God because the God of Islam is associated with pagan stuff or something along those lines, which is true, but in fact, so is Judaism. Jehovah, if you go back in time far enough, Jehovah is also associated with paganism. Of course, the Elohim are a group of gods. It's not one God. That's why if you read the book of Genesis, it says, we created man in our image. Of course, we and our are plural and not singular. So it's referring to a group of creator gods. Now, the original text doesn't say we and our. The original text says Elohim created man in Elohim's image. And of course, Elohim is a group of gods. Now, so the important thing about Jehovah is Jehovah played a very important role for humanity. So Rudolf Steiner in the Rosicrucian Teachings, Rudolf Steiner doesn't say that Jehovah and Yaldabaoth is the same. In the Gnostic teachings really make a strong argument that they're the same. But that it's very dangerous, though, to think of Jehovah as Yaldabaoth, because you can really hate Yaldabaoth, because Yaldabaoth is very, very bad, really wants to enslave humanity and is really against humanity. And Jehovah, though, is not against humanity. I'll explain that a little bit. So what Jehovah did was Jehovah placed the group I capital in the astral body of man so that humans could develop the individual I, the I capital later on as individuals. And here are some different terms for the I capital. In Latin, ego. Here's some German terms, and then Hebrew, and then in Indian spirituality in the East, it's known as Kama Manas. What I'm going to do, though, right now is I'm going to read briefly from this book, The East in the Light of the West, and it talks a little bit about this subject. I think it sheds a little bit of light, because Jehovah is, we're told, is not on the sun with the rest of the Elohim, which is strange because the moon is associated with death. So why would Jehovah be on the moon? And this explains it, breaks it down a little bit. So I'm going to read pages 54 through 56. And it reads as follows. We must remember that it was not merely for the sake of man that the separation of the moon and sun from the earth came to pass, but also for the sake of those beings whose evolution was at first bound to that of humanity. In the sun dwell beings who need the sun for their evolution, just as the evolution of man needs the earth. To remain with the earth would have been death to their existence. But the separation resulted in their becoming able, by degrees, to reach a stage where their beneficent influences could flow down to the earth from without. When the seer observes the light, when he perceives external objects, he realizes at a certain stage of his evolution that it is the sun beings which live behind the physical phenomenon of color, sound, and so on, but that these beings themselves had to develop to their present stage. These sun spirits are the upper spiritual beings contacted through the phenomenon of the sense world. Let us now ask how the inner stimulus was given to save mankind from hardening, from ossification. Certain beings were needed which at the appropriate time withdrew the moon substances from the earth. These beings realized that the act of the sun beings was not sufficient, and that they must protect the earth from ossification by withdrawing the moon from the earth. They were in a certain respect higher than the sun spirits. These latter, when the sun was still united with the earth, felt themselves obliged for the sake of their development to find another dwelling place, but the other spirits were able to remain with the earth even after the sun spirits had gone out. And this made it possible for them to save human evolution at a certain point of time by separating the moon from the earth. And I'm going to continue a little bit more. Thus they were in a certain respect higher than the sun beings. They were able to separate a substance from the earth relatively coarser than that connected with the sun spirits, and by becoming rulers of this coarse substance to prove their greater power. For those who are able to transform evil into good are more powerful than those who rule over the good and make it possibly a little better. Now, it's actually talking about these beings from old Saturn who separated the moon from the earth. And I'll get into that now. I'm going to read pages 64 and 65 from The East and the Light of the West, which is a really good book, especially if you've been developing, following the Christ impulse for a number of years and you've actually developed spiritually. Maybe you have the beginning stages of clairvoyance and maybe a lot of the stuff you're past a lot of the, because a lot of Rudolf Steiner's books and teachings are for people who haven't made any progress, right? And after a while, you're like, well, why don't I read something that applies to me? You'll really like this if you've developed. You'll really enjoy it. 64 and 65. We have to first consider a class of spiritual beings which attained a certain stage of evolution during the Old Sun period. They belong to the Old Sun evolution because it was destined to provide a field of action for them. These are beings which separated the sun from the earth during the earth period, because during Old Sun they were sun bound in the same way as humanity is now earthbound. As we have seen, they needed the sun for their further evolution, and with the sun they left the earth in order to work upon the latter from without. When the sun spirits had withdrawn, the Saturn and moon spirits were left on the earth. The development of the Saturn spirits was such that they could direct and guide the separation of the moon from the earth. They had passed through the same stage on old Saturn as the sun spirits had done on old Sun. Their maturity had preceded that of the sun spirits, and they were therefore able to separate the moon from the earth and to stimulate from within the inner development of man, who otherwise would have hardened and become mummified. It may be said that the withdrawal of the sun was brought about by the sun spirits, and that of the moon by the Saturn spirits. So that kind of explains the situation with because we went through a Saturn stage of evolution, a sun stage of evolution, a moon stage of evolution, and now we're in our Earth stage of evolution. Also, there was a time when the sun and Earth and moon were united, and then the sun and moon broke off. And it seemed odd that Jehovah would be on the moon. But then what we just read from that book, basically the Saturn spirits are higher than the sun spirits. And the Saturn spirits separated the moon from the earth, and that helped us in our evolution. It also says that the Saturn spirits are able to transform evil into good. So that's just an interesting thing to consider. If because Jehovah is on the moon, so that would put Jehovah in those forces that are able to change evil into good. And Jehovah did help humanity with the I capital. Well, I've run out of light, and I don't have my other light set up right now, and this really got lengthy. I kind of said everything I wanted to say. I'm not really making videos regularly right now. I was doing them weekly, and I kind of retired from full-time, being a full-time creator for YouTube. But once in a while, I'll come out with these videos. I hope you liked it. Thanks for watching.